This Wednesday night, as we gather in the parking lot again for the first time as a giant youth ministry family that we haven't done in a while, we're going to kick off a new conversation. So one of the things we always do is when we gather, we talk about Jesus, because that is why we are here and why we gather, is to grow closer to Jesus, encounter Jesus, and grow closer to one another. One of the best ways we do that is having a conversation about the words, teachings of Jesus that are found inside the Bible. And so this month, while we're meeting outside at the very least, we're going to be having a conversation about the Uncharted season we find ourselves in now. So it's a conversation entitled Uncharted. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately in this Uncharted season is I've been thinking a lot about the explorers of history that are some of the most famous explorers in history. The one and the only Lewis and Clark. Now, if you're a 90s kid, or if you've seen it because of pop culture, you know there used to be a game called the Oregon Trail. And now that could be one of the reasons why Lewis and Clark are some of my favorite people in history and some of my favorite explorers, because I grew up playing the classic video game, the Oregon Trail, where at every course of action you took in the video game, there was a shot you could die. You might flood, you might die of dysentery, your horse and buggy, I don't even know what it's called anymore, your covered carriage might catch on fire, you might lose your food. I mean, whatever it is in the Oregon Trail, there was a chance that you might die. It was perfect in elementary school when it was computer hour and you had to go to computer class. You would just sit there and play the Oregon Trail, and it was educational and all that jazz. But the Oregon Trail was possible because of the explorers Lewis and Clark. And what I love about Lewis and Clark is I believe that they have something to teach us about this Uncharted season. And we're not going to talk about it this Wednesday night, but I've been thinking of the story of Lewis and Clark the past 5 or 6 months. And so in a couple of weeks, when you come on Wednesday night, you're going to hear me talk about Lewis and Clark. And just here's kind of a snapshot of Lewis and Clark and what I think they have to contribute as we think about this Uncharted conversation that we're going to have. See, Lewis and Clark were hired by the government, tasked by the government, by the American government, to find a journey west, to find a path west. They were to start east and work their way west, ending up at the Pacific Ocean on the west coast in Oregon. They had maps, and they started off on their journey. They thought they could take a canoe and take the canoe the entire way down one river to the west coast, to the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you've taken any type of geography class or any type of American history class, you know that was not the case. At some point, at some time, they realized their maps were wrong, that everything they thought they knew about the journey west was not what it was. They realized once they got to a really big mountain, not these baby mountains that we find ourselves here going to in North Carolina, but like a real mountain in the West, that their maps were wrong. They were entering uncharted territory. In fact, Lewis and Clark discovered they had to trade their canoe for some hiking poles. They had to trade their canoe paddles for some hiking sticks. They had to trade their canoe, their way by water, by a way of walking and hiking, an entirely new way of travel through maps that were no good into uncharted territory. And they could have turned around. They could have hit the point where they went, man, we weren't prepared for this. We weren't ready for this. We need to stop what we are doing and go backwards, go home, throw in the towel, stop it. This is uncharted. We don't know what we're going to do. We're not going to survive it. But that's not what Lewis and Clark did. They kept going. They entered into uncharted land, uncharted territory, uncharted maps. And now we have the West Coast. We have Washington and Oregon, thankfully, in part to Lewis and Clark pushing through the uncharted season they find themselves in. Now, you may be wondering, how does all this tie to faith? We're not going to talk about it this Wednesday night, but that is the framework for our conversation on this uncharted season we find ourselves in. Is we're going to have conversations for the next month about this idea of learning how to step into a map that is no longer filled out. Step into a map and step into a season where we no longer have all the answers for us. So I'm excited to see you this Wednesday night. Bring a friend, bring a mask, bring your own chair, get ready for pizza, fun, games, and we're going to dive into this conversation around life with Jesus and entering into an uncharted time. I'm so excited to see you. Grace and peace, students.